Good afternoon again, everyone. We've got a great panel coming up on creative trends in email marketing. I'm going to pass it off to Alex, and he can introduce the panel and panelists.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alex Williams. I work for Trendline Interactive. We are a email marketing agency and consultancy. Been around for about 10 years. Started our creative practice there, spent many years as a creative director. Everybody on the panel here is designed and coded their fair share of emails, directed them, advised on them. We have a great panel. Elliot Ross is joining us from Taxi for email and from Action Rocket, and also Mark Robbins from Salesforce. You guys want to say a quick hello and introduce yourselves?
Hi. Yeah, so I'm Elliot. I founded Action Rocket, which is an agency that designs and builds emails, and then Taxi, which is a tool that helps the whole team get in on the action really and build emails themselves. And good to be here.
I'm Mark. I work for Salesforce as a software engineer, building interactive content and focusing a lot on accessibility. And I'm also a member of the AMP for Email working group, so working on interactive content in that side as well.
Excellent. Yes, so I have a cool topic today, creative trends in email marketing, obviously with an e-commerce flavor for today. Wanted to hit on generally what topics we're going to be discussing today on the panel. We're going to start with design, content, and layout trends. I think these are obviously the most visual for everybody. Code, interactivity, user experience. I think one thing you see in email is that a lot of trends do come from coding advances and new opportunities there. So we'll dig into that. I think discussing what's driving these trends that we're seeing and has the potential to drive future trends in the inbox, and then culminate on what trends that we've discussed here today have the most potential ROI. I always remember going to a conference and coming home with just all these ideas, and it's kind of like, which one to do first? Which one should we try? Which ones are going to work for us? So I think we can talk about those, and then would love questions for the end. Any topic as it relates to anything email creative. And I think, Elliot, you wanted to mention previously on creative trends.
Yes. So in previous conferences, the reason I want to talk about this is email's sometimes quite a slow medium, and the thing with creative trends is sometimes we say the same thing each year. Some of these topics have been around a while, but they're still important. So email design systems, you may also know that as modular templates, but basically the idea of having a set of code or structures that you reuse rather than building everything from scratch each time. That's something that isn't new, but it's something that has been growing over the last few years. And it's also starting to merge into things like passing on your intent as well as the code. So being able to say to other people on the team, hey, here's how this stuff should be used, or here's systematically how it should be updated and things like that. So I think that's something that's been talked about before, and we're not really going to talk a huge amount today about, but I wanted to raise it because that's something that the stuff we are talking about is sometimes in this context. Accessibility as well is something that's been around for, quite a long time now, but it's something that email designers have been looking at for the last few years. If you're new to accessibility, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's out there to catch up on or to read up on. But essentially, it's not just, at its core, it's about making sure your email works for people with disabilities or different needs, but also the main idea there as well is improving the accessibility of your email improves the experience for everyone. So it is very important to do, and it's not just add some code and now it's accessible. So there's a big bunch of stuff to read up on there, but we'll talk again about how the stuff we're looking at works in that context. Interactive is something that Mark has done a huge amount of stuff on, and lots of shiny stuff at conferences about, but yeah, that's something that's been going on for a few years now. And yeah, mobile. I think we joke every year that this year's going to be the year of mobile. And we've been saying this since about 2012, and it has, and a lot of people at least are on board with it now, but there's always more we can do with mobile. So I wanted to flag that because, again, we've made design work nicely in mobile, and we've worked out how to code it for most of our devices these days, but there's more we can think about. Think about that context, think about how your creative and your design works in a mobile environment. So that's previously in the last few years on these types of talks. So we want to push things on a bit, but also acknowledge that that's the world that we're in, and everyone's at different speeds and in different places. So yeah.
Yeah. So to show an example of that, Litmus, the email testing and analytics platform, most people are probably familiar with. They have a great resource, which is emailclientmarketshare.com, and from their analytics, they just track which email clients are opening up emails. So while not a perfect metric, it is very directional. Programs I've worked on, I've seen Gmail up in the 80%. It's not necessarily to say that this is what your mix looks like, but it is good to think about where you have the most support and where you need to be putting your focus on. We always know email teams tend to be under-resourced, and we have a limited amount of time to turn things around. So having resources like this to focus on is great. But I think one thing you'll see here is that the trends here haven't really moved. You've seen Apple and Gmail rise, and you're seeing the bottom of some of these lists just kind of fall off the map. And I think that's a good example that trends have a long shelf life in email. So when you jump on a trend, that wave might be 3 or 4 years. So don't feel like by the time you tackle one of these trends, it's over. They tend to last a while in email. Yeah, so let's dig into it. So I think as we looked at things, there's definitely some design trends. It's funny when you put it on for 2020, like if it's trends for 2021, and then you show all your examples from 2020, right? And then we're not we're not trying to future predict here. We're just kind of showing you the way things have been moving, and some of the things for you to think about on your own programs as you look at some of these trends. So the first one wanted to look at was color. I think this is a very good trend for email, especially for the folks of us who have made a lot of emails working with a lot of different brands, and some of the struggle that we can have in getting into their secondary palettes and getting away from our 3 primary brand colors are all that's allowed in an email. So I wanted to pull 3 examples here because of the tones here that I don't think you really associate with these brands, and show how much that doesn't matter and how powerful it is. So in this Sonos example, in this Jules example, in this Fitbit example, you can see this, and I picked some similar ones here, but across the spectrum, what are you guys seeing with the color trend, or how would you describe it, and how would people tackle it? I'll start with you, Elliot.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like brands can be quite sort of unintentionally prescriptive, and as marketers, sometimes we're working with the brand team or whatever, and we sometimes take that, these are the 3 colors we're allowed to use because they're the brand colors, and that's it. But I think email campaigns, you've got sometimes a bit of license to dig into other colors, and I think like the Sonos example is a nice example there, because really that kind of pink, sort of creamy, it's quite pastel-y color, but that's driven by the colors that are in the image, perhaps more than the brand guideline colors, and that's okay. It's not necessarily off-brand or anything like that. But also the thing that's really driving that is if you look at the speaker, the product is what you want to stand out there, and that's white. So you want a color that helps your product shine, really. So yeah, obviously, work with the brand team on that, and don't go wildly off brand and without them knowing, and have that conversation. It's all about collaboration and that kind of stuff. But I think there is scope for, you do see quite a lot of this stuff going on now. people introducing more color that's beyond their standard brand palette, I suppose.
Yeah, what are you seeing there, Mark, at the trend level on color?
Yeah, I think it's definitely is sort of good to sort of see this sort of getting out of the box a bit with it. And I think if you're, it's not, maybe not for every campaign. Don't do every campaign in a different color scheme, because that's just going to get confusing. Do, like as Elliot said, work with your brand team. But this could be tied in with other things, like your billboard advertising maybe is using that similar color scheme. So it ties it all in together so you can work around it. And also still being aware of the brand. Like, particularly if you look at that Fitbit one, you can see at the top, they've definitely still got that blue part of their logo. It's still using the same logo. It's still recognizable. Keep your fonts and your styling recognizable. Just keep some parts of it. Don't change everything. Keep some bits recognizable as well, so it does tie in with the rest of your emails. But making a change like this can really make something stand out.
The other thing on this is, I agree, Mark. On accessibility, there's a consideration for use of color there as well. So, when we were starting looking at how accessibility works for email, there is some code you can do to make your email work better on a screen reader. But perhaps this is where we can take that further, and we can think about actually how do these colors. We've got that kind of, the Jules email has got that salmony pink red color, and then the green. How are they going to work for people who have color blindness, for example? And there's also all sorts of different types of color blindness. There's also different visual challenges that people have where contrast is a massive factor. So if you have, it's very tempting, especially with these pastel-y colors, to have a kind of very pastel-y background and then a only slightly lighter or darker bit of text. But if you don't have that contrast between the two, some people are going to have significant challenges understanding what your email's saying. So accessibility does have an impact on this as well.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, there's some great tools out there to check your contrast. Email on Acid, for example, which is also a testing platform. They have a great little campaign checker where they will check and actually make the code adjustments for your colors, and a lot of times you can barely notice it, but it goes a long way. I think those are great points. And let's look at also another trend here that I really think is here to stay, which is photography, and what people are doing with photography. I think you're starting to see a real turn away from doing a search word on a stock photo site and picking one of the first 8 images you see before you scroll. I think some of the things that I see is a lot more inclusiveness in who's in the photos, a lot more interesting angles. I think is a huge trend, a lot more eye-catching, and then a lot more just kind of realism, right? I thought that feather example there, where you could definitely see how that photo would have this magical window scene, almost kind of like a Peloton commercial, right? Where everything is like perfect. That's what a real office looks like. That's what the corners where everybody's working is. What are you guys seeing on the photography and email trends?
I think there's definitely, in 2020 with the ongoing situations that we're in, definitely that shot of people sitting in the office just doesn't work, right? Especially in B2B. So that making stuff a bit more real and acknowledging the situation that people are in through photography is good. And also, inclusion, like we've seen a lot of movement on that, which has been really interesting. To be fair though, even in stock photography, that's happening as well. So if you don't, it is hard to arrange a photo shoot with everything that you want right now in the world we're in. So I don't want to say never use stock photography, because you might have to at the moment. But there's movement to sites like Unsplash, for example, which is it does it a bit of a disservice, but very Instagrammy stock photography. And you know, those kind of routes give you imagery that is perhaps more realistic or more contextual, rather than the, you know, the standard. I think it got shut down, but there's a great site where it was all the kind of cliches of stock photography and pictures of people laughing at salad and stuff like that. It's yeah, that kind of stuff doesn't really work anymore. I like that the sneaker as well. Just it's quite ballsy, right? Like, you could see the merchandising people saying, no, it's got to be a perfect, you know, the perfect, as you buy it, aspirational photo of the shoe, and actually no, it's exactly what your shoes look like in real life. I like that. Mine anyway.
Yeah, it seems to be a move away from the fantasy more into the reality of things. I think and part of that as well, that carries through into the inclusion side of it, and like, you know, getting a more diverse models in your photography. Also, I've just a couple of accessibility points to point out with these as with text over an image, that can be quite tricky to read. I think these ones look okay. The one on the left might be sort of pushing it a little bit, because when you have a complicated background, it's harder to pick out the definition of characters of letters to read it. But also when doing that, then you've got to consider the use of alt text, because normally with an image you'd have alt text to describe what this image is doing. But if the image is in the background, but it's still part of the content, if it's still adding to the content, then you need to still give it a description as well and get that into the flow of the text over the top. So that, yeah, there's ways around doing that, but it's just things to consider alongside that.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I think, you know, one thing as we go through this, you can also see some of the trends cascading on each other, right? On these two examples on the right, you have those muted tones, the warm muted tones, right, in the background. And then I have definitely seen an increase in using all image heroes, is to try to pull off a lot of these trends. So I think Mark's point is really important. It's one of those things with email, right? You got to test out what drives for your audience, but there are ways to make it accessible if you have to go down that path. Also, you can see here, really, there's no Arial in these examples, right? They're also leaning on fonts. Web fonts from a trend haven't really changed much. Going back to that trend chart, Apple supports them, Google doesn't. So there's a balancing act for all those trends for sure. Let's look at another area, which is illustrations. So definitely an uptick here. You can also see some of those cascading trends, right? The color tones. I picked 3 examples here. Let's try to describe this first one. How would you describe this, this first style?
Hand drawn, I suppose. It's kind of amateur.
Yeah, sketch.
Yeah. I like it though. And also it solves a problem, and you see people go down this route quite often when I apologize to Bagu, but when the product isn't that sexy, sometimes hand drawing or, you know, illustration instead of photography is a nice way to go there. And you see that with some of the mattress products. You know, that mattress seems to be the SaaS product of, or, you know, D2C product of choice for a lot of organizations. But like, yeah, there's no way to make a mattress look that nice, so they go quite quickly into what's the experience, you know, and you get illustrations about a starry night and that kind of stuff. So yeah, illustration is a way to get those nice feelings and that kind of I guess dreamy aspects into your work. There's also a bit of a narrative of inclusion on that middle one as well. Like when we were planning this, I was joking around and saying, like, you look on quite a lot of SaaS websites now and you see these kind of weird, completely ambiguous, like, unclear gender, unclear age, ethnicity, kind of different color blob people on SaaS products at the moment. And I think some of that is a part of it's a reaction to not wanting to well to be inclusive, and also perhaps not have specific types of people in their work. So yeah, I think that illustration helps you get there as well, because I guess the alternative with photography is to go down the route of the old United Benetton world of people ads, whatever they're called. And yeah, that in the current climate is going to be a hard photo shoot to set up.
Yeah, there's an ambiguousness that makes things kind of inviting. I also think the first example with I don't know if it was kind of purposefully amateurish. There's also a personalness to that, right? And then I think this one on the right, to me, these type of things really grab attention, and they are what I would put in the illustration category. They got that realism to it. They're kind of assembling it. It's more of a computer drawing, but it's got that real quality. And when you can build those things, you can do really interesting angles, right? Like we've got a classic email pattern, which is everything on the bottom pointing up to the to the button. And I think you mentioned Instagram. I definitely see that trend from Instagram advertising coming to email with those angles and with those, different ways of looking at things. And I think from an HTML to image balance, illustrations can give you a lot of flexibility, because you can use colored backgrounds, HTML colors. You can kind of assemble things a little bit more than having to rely on an overall image. And then you can also bring your GIF game into the animations, because you have more control of what's going on. So now I would say illustrating is a skill and a talent, and having owning an illustration style and replicating it over and over again can be a lot of creative time. Yeah. So there is a definite consideration to how scalable that is for your group. But
it's harder. It's harder than it looks as well. Drawing that washing machine looks easy, but when you're trying to build a system that is consistent, it's harder than it looks.
Yeah, I think these three that we've looked at, the uses of color, the photos, the illustrations, one kind of thing I've always been afraid of, and I would be afraid of on a brand side, is I don't want people thinking they know exactly what my email is going to look like before they open it up. Because I think that's the start to, I can skip this one. Or I'll open it when I'm interested, right? This, when subject lines have a high volatility of driving your open rate, is a lot of a sign that you're in that kind of zone.
Totally.
So even if you didn't do all these things all the time, I kind of call it the reboot to expectation, purposeful switch with colors, with photos, with illustrations, to just kind of reboot people and let them know you're challenging them and doing interesting things.
I was going to say as well, with illustrations from a technical point of view, you can use like PNG formats, and so you get a lighter weight image. So you can get more images in without sort of bloating the weight of the code. And you can do like GIFs. Like this one is just, was it 3-4 frames, that GIF, and it looks great. But if that was like trying to replicate a video, that would be blocky, it would be pixelated, and it'll be a huge file size. So that definitely is an advantage there of using those. And even if it's something very simple, you can even do things with code. You can do like little icons of very simple illustrations just with code. So that will even show when images are turned off from the user's point of view. Although that is something that adds more HTML, and it's sort of quite very time consuming to build. So there are definitely drawbacks there too.
Yeah. Our buddy Ted Ghost, he shared a email on Twitter which had this really cool snowboarding scene in it, but the GIF was 14 megabytes.
Wow.
Which, I don't know. My rule of thumb is try to keep it under 500, and if it's really cool, about a meg-ish.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think look at the total size of all the images in the email combined as well. I think has something to look at.
Yeah.
Keeping that low.
To Mark's point as well, like emojis are, you know, they're technically illustrations, and they're in the narrative of, you know, of public discourse if it works with your brand, and also they, as far as page weight goes, an emoji is the same in terms of file size as a letter of text, you know. So if it works for your brand, that's also a route to inject a bit of color, a bit of illustration, I suppose, a small bit, without it being you know, too over the top, too distracting, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and just to shoot down a old wives' tale there, the size of your image has nothing to do with the weight of your email as far as clipping.
Yes.
It's just the weight of the text, the actual HTML file. So most of the things about assets and the size of them are about how quick they load, especially when you have animations, how smooth they are versus super jittery. And yeah, when people are on a mobile bandwidth plan and you just knock out 14 megabytes right off the top with your email, it's not great.
Yeah.
Okay, and then layout. So I think, and this has been a slow moving glacial trend in email. So if you go back about 10 years, the top of an email was the most cluttered, jammed up area with
Could be above the fold.
You got a visible pre-header. You got a view as a web page link. You got a navigation thing. You got a free shipping text. You got 2 bullet pointed texts up there. And I think I love this trend because we don't need preview headers we don't need visible pre-headers anymore, right? You can do preview text in your code. It serves the purpose of pre-opening, adding some more content to get somebody to open. You don't have to visually show it anymore. And then also you draw people in so much more when you don't have that particular clutter. And then also I think, you know, I've been sticking the view as a web page link in the footer now for a while. I think people are starting to know to look there if that's important to you. But yeah, you just optimize that real estate. You just bring them into your idea so much faster and have, I think, a quicker chance to resonate in the what's in it for me about this email, what's it all about. Yeah. And I think it gives you a lot more flexibility, right? Some of these cascading trends, right? You've got the really interesting angle of the photo on the left. You've got the muted color tones on the back with some illustration. Those are, look at the guy on the green chair, Elliot. He doesn't have any feet. There's your.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's inclusivity for you.
No hands, weird people. But it does the job, right? And then you've got that illustration combined with a real envelope, which is cool. Here on the REI one, you see that blending style that you see a lot where the colors shifting behind the assets. You're moving section to section. This thought's over, a new thought's starting. But yeah, I think I call it the kind of Marie Kondo effect email's having, where it's not just, Marie Kondo will say it's not just about minimalism, it's about like lifestyle and your values. And I think some of those trends together, you see people combining those to get the values, get the what's in it for me across, and kind of reducing the clutter. I don't know. What are you guys seeing from a layout trend perspective?
Yeah, I mean, for me on these types of emails, one thing that I think is interesting is when you think about how people read email, and especially on mobile, they're going to be jumping between lots of different apps. They're going to be looking at social, you know, they're looking at Instagram or whatever, and Instagram is full of all this, you know, the influencer type photography and all that kind of stuff. It's very desirable, right? And if you jump from Instagram or Snapchat or whatever, and then you go into your email and you're presented with 5 paragraphs of text about why you should do something, not going to fly. Like, you're not in that mindset. You're not going to sit and think, right now I'm going to read all this stuff. So I could see this type of content working in that social mindset. Like, people go, great, now I've looked at Instagram and I've looked at TikTok or whatever. Now here's a thing from Postable. Great. You know, that they can understand that message really quickly. Labor Day sale, get 20% off. Here's the code. Monday night is when it finishes. Good, browse cards, off you go. Like, there's 2 seconds there to understand the message and press the button, and off you go and start buying. That's got to have such better results than like a long-winded, here's all of the possible stuff that we need to tell you. So I think this type of content hierarchy works really well, especially for e-commerce, where a lot of what we're doing is fairly single message, take a single action. That's not to say email has to be short. You can make it so that if people have more time, you can scroll in and you can give them more information. But if people have only got a short attention span, there's something for them to act on. I think that's really key with the way that people engage with content in all spaces at this point. I quite like the REI one. Like, just the layout's quite nice as well. Like, having an image that breaks out of where the background color is quite a nice, a bit of a code nightmare, but it's a nice visual thing. And again, they've got that little box on the all set one on the left there, kind of creeps up above the image. Like that's nice. It just kind of pushes the boundaries a bit. The other thing that's going on here, which I like, is having quite strong use of color to delineate, like, especially on the REI one, this is dark green and this is the header. Now we're going to talk about something else, and it's on light green underneath. So they're chunking up the content and making it easier for people to digest. Which, if people are scrolling through and they've got that kind of scrolling mentality from jumping in from social or whatever, I think that works really well. It helps them not be too overwhelmed by what's going on.
No, that's a good point. I always, when I'm training a designer that has never designed email before, I always kind of harp on one of the trickier spots is sort of ending a thought and starting a new one.
Yeah.
And I think mobile, if you really look on mobile, when you're scrolling, you can get in some weird spots where you're looking at the body copy of the thing that's not on the screen, and you're looking at a picture of something that doesn't have any context to it. So yeah, doing those kind of things where it's kind of like, yes, this thought's over, we're moving on to the next thought. Emails like this do live and die by the click-through on that email, but if you put that thought into the second and third level of an email, you'll train people to scroll.
Yes.
And to me, it's about just because somebody said no to the hero doesn't mean they're not going to say yes to the next thing below it. People who click on content at the bottom of an email are, that's your best audience, right? They're going down that path. So put some energy into the second and third levels there, and make sure you're closing thoughts. Also, what do you guys think?
Little thing.
Oh, go ahead, Elliot.
Sorry. One tiny little accessibility point. That's about the limit of center aligned text that you should go for. Anything more than that is hard to read and confusing. So yeah, not to break your flow, Alex, but yeah, just to wave the flag for that. Like, short and sweet if it's center aligned. Otherwise, left align it. It's just so much easier for people to read.
Yeah, it's about where the sentence, the start of the line is, and if they're inconsistent. If everything's left aligned, everything starts on left. If it's center aligned, the start point of each line is different. For 2 lines you get away with it. For 3 or more, it doesn't work well, doesn't read very well.
Yeah,
that's my sort of rule of thumb, which is character counts are just really tough in email. Because you just don't know. You also don't know like which line stuff needs to break on. You don't want San on one line and Diego on the next line, right? You get into weird spots. And so like 2 to 3 lines is usually my baseline for centered text. I think. What's a good rule of thumb for the audience from you guys when they think about centered?
I'd say headings can be centered, paragraphs always align left, or unless you're in a right to left language, then align right. But yeah, generally paragraphs anything in a paragraph, I think is safest to put to the side, because also if you look at that example on the right, that's the desktop view. If that were to be viewed on mobile, then you'd probably get maybe 3 or 4 lines of text centralized. They may have a media query correcting that, but not sure.
The thing for me is try it. Like, so the science behind this, there's a typography concept called the measure, which is the amount of words on a line and things like that. So you can go and geek up on that. Like, send the email to yourself, put it on your phone, and walk around your house or whatever, because that's what your audience is doing. And if you can read the sentence or the paragraph without jumping onto the next line by mistake or reading the same line twice or whatever, then you're probably okay. But yeah, like, try it in context and make sure it's if it doesn't work for you, it's not going to work for anyone else, right?
Definitely. Well, I see in the audience they're interested in dark mode, so we are right there. So I pulled a simple example together, and then I'll show one I just made recently that takes advantage of a little more of what you can do there. But I think, I was looking back. I think someone asked me for trends in 2019, and I'd mentioned dark mode. Dark mode's just getting going, in my opinion. So generally, and one of the biggest questions you get from clients and stakeholders is how many people use dark mode. For computer settings like that, there's not great stats to look like iOS adoption and that kind of thing. I've seen some numbers that say 80% use it sometimes. There are ways you can find out if you go down that path, but I think I think on this example, right, what's going on here, the asset's not really changing. They're doing very basic targeting on the background colors and the text, right? Very basic. But when you're in dark mode, and I think this is also part of that standing out in the inbox, when you're in dark mode and everything on your computers go in dark mode, and then you go into your email client and the lights turn on and the spotlights shine in your eye, when that dark mode email comes up, yes, I think it adds an opportunity to grab some attention in a still kind of lightened inbox. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think taking it back to accessibility, as I like to do, it's about respecting the user preferences. If the user has said they want this in dark mode, we should give them dark mode. We shouldn't try and override it and switch back to the light version. But also that rule works both ways. If your designs are generally dark, if all your emails are dark and somebody has light mode, maybe do a lighter version of it. It could still be sort of, not fully white background, but something that is sort of lighten it up a little bit, because some users find it a lot easier to read black text on white. Some users find it a lot easier to read white text on black. And sometimes it's situational. If you're sitting in bed at night and the lights are off, then actually probably white text on black is a lot easier. But then if you're outside in the sun shining down on your phone screen, then maybe black text on a white background is easier to read. So that's one of the things that sort of, with accessibility is very much about sort of, accounting for certain things that like needs that users might have, but also respecting the preferences they've asked for. So with the code, we can look at a prefers color scheme and see if they have a preference and then deliver that to them. There's also other things like prefers reduced transparency, prefers reduced motion. So if somebody wants, doesn't want to see animations, perhaps like they could trigger seizures and stuff if they have like flashing GIFs. So you can do switch arounds for that. There's a lot that can be done with that as well, with like font sizes. You can do a lot of you can using relative units, so actually you're carrying that through. But I think this example here, they've done a great job of changing that over. There's not a huge amount that's changing. It's just the background color and the text color, but it's done really well. Actually, the logo at the top as well changes over, but it's done really cleanly, really easily, and it's a small little change that you can put in. If you particularly around design like this, it's a small piece of code that you can put in that will enhance the experience for those users and in those email clients that currently support it. And it's not going to have any negative effects on the rest of your users. So here you're just going to have like about 4 lines of code to say, bring in this media query, change the font color, change the background color. It's that simple. It's very, very minimal. It can be very minimal.
You bring up a good point there, though, because yes, you can choose to target dark mode. Now, that targeting is going to work in a couple environments, right? You're going to work in Apple clients. You're going to work in Outlook for web. You have other clients who are doing this for you, like Gmail, and you don't have the ability to target that, so, which is frustrating to everybody, obviously. But there are certain things that become very problematic when it's auto-generated. One would be if that framer logo, for example, was just a black transparent ping. So you also have to defensively design against auto-generated dark mode. So some things you start to see are people putting small glows behind those particular assets, avoiding that pure black transparency type of objects. What are some other defensive design components for the auto dark mode, Elliot?
Yeah, so I mean, one thing you could do is, like, you have that circle on the left where it says dark mode over it. Like, you could put the logo on a circle, for example. So you'd have black logo on a white circle. The white wouldn't show up on the light version, but then on the dark mode version, you'd see the black logo still, but it'd be on a white circle, and that would then show up. Like, that would at least defensively, still get the logo to come up. It probably wouldn't. Might look a little odd. Perhaps you might need to leave a bit more space in your design for a circle or kind of blob shape or whatever. But it would at least make sure the message gets through. The other point on that, you're right. Things like Outlook and Gmail, they to some extent have a mind of their own, and we can't control them, unfortunately. But also Apple, if you don't do anything for dark mode and you don't put any specific code, it can also try and do stuff itself and try and change things. So it might be that the stuff you're sending today without any code at all for dark mode still has some challenges. So it's worth an immediate check just to see what's going on. And then you can get started with some defensive stuff and then really dig into how you could actually change it and really make a go of it. It's one of those things that it is fairly new and we're kind of feeling our way, but also it's an important thing to understand and to start working towards. But also there are various steps. You can get started with some basics and make sure that what you're doing is working, and then grow from there. And as Mark said, you could, if you really wanted to, you could use code to make sure that everyone gets the light version, but that's not a good approach to do. So I'm not going to recommend that. And it's against what people want out of it and that kind of thing.
I wanted to show an example I just did recently. So at the top with the logo, we're swapping the logo out for dark mode support. For not dark mode support, we've got that logo stroked. So there's a small white stroke around it. On the images, and it may be tough with the resolution here, but we are kind of desaturating them to reduce the brightness of them, kind of to your point, Mark. Also take the green and brightening it a little bit. And then also, as you start to layer, one of the design principles I think you see a lot is that it's the closer content gets to you, the lighter it gets. So here we've got a much darker background, and then that module that's sitting on top has more of a charcoal. So it's kind of like dark to light shades the closer everything's coming to you. But yeah, you've got a lot of options in there. And I think to the larger point, for me with dark mode is what I think it's a slower trend to take off is because I think a lot of companies don't really have a style guide for dark mode. So it's not really up
Yeah.
to your developer to make your email dark mode because they're just going to do like code fixes potentially, unless you've got that great developer who's a designer too. So I think it's a larger conversation for the brand. If you don't have a style guide, you need to set some ground rules for what you want the brand to look like in a dark mode fashion. I think if you do that, you can really take off with this trend.
Yeah, and that has to be in the context of what works for dark mode as well, right? It can't just be, well, these are our brand colors and what's some darker versions of them or something. Like, you've really got to understand how is this gonna work? Like you've changed the green there, but that's in the context of how it works, right? You haven't just picked a random green that's in your style guide.
Totally. All right, so we're moving on with time. I wanted to kind of queue up this coding and interactivity piece, which is probably, I think this is the biggest thing to happen in email for a while. AMP for email. Mark, do you want to give a quick overview of what that is, and then I'll show a quick demo of an AMP email?
Yeah, so AMP for email is a open source code framework that was originally developed by Google, and it's a way of it's an extra MIME type that we're sending. So you can see in the illustration here, we've got the plain text email, we've got HTML email, and now we have this new third type, which is our AMP version of the email. So it's worth remembering with this, it's all bundled up as one. So you have one subject line, one pre-header, one from name. There's nothing distinguishes it in the inbox until the user clicks to open it, and then you see which of these three that is opened. So there's a huge amount of possibilities that can be done with AMP for email. There's like endless use cases, really. So we can the three main areas are sort of click interactions. So you click something in the email and something changes. There's form submissions. So you can fill out a form essentially and submit that, and then that will submit data to an endpoint somewhere. So it's great for doing reviews or user preferences and things like that. And the other part is live content. So you can actually pull in content which is live at the time of open. So when the email opens, that content is live, and then also once it's opened, you can refresh it, but that has to be done on a user action. So if the user clicks, it can be refreshed. You can't refresh automatically, unfortunately. So with those sort of three aspects of it, there's a huge amount of possibilities of what can be done. And I think this example here from Google is brilliant, which is so we have first up at the top we've got this gallery, I guess. So we've got choose the color. So you've got 4 different options of what color of these headphones that we want. And then you can click from there, click to add to cart, and then they get added into your in-email shopping carts. And from there, we can adjust the quantity. So we can say if we want more or less. So at the moment, we've got quite a few. We've got 3 different versions, or now 2 different versions. And then you can click checkout, and then that will take you through to the checkout page on the website. So we've done all the sort of the selection, all the choices have been made in the email, and we put them over to the website much further down the funnel. So they're actually just ready to put in their card details and delivery address and buy it. So it really sort of takes that step out, takes that friction out with something like this. And also what was great about this particular campaign is on the HTML version of this email, they had a very, very similar experience because they're using interactive HTML. So you can actually do a lot of the same things in HTML. It's a lot harder to do the HTML side of it. But so that means people who receive the AMP email, which will be people using Gmail and Yahoo, Mail.ru as well, and soon to be AOL, will see this AMP version. People using something like the sort of more advanced email clients like Apple Mail will see an interactive HTML version. Everyone else sees a static version. But you do need, like as I said earlier, you do need to think about the subject line and the campaign and the why are you doing this? This email needs to make sense for all the groups of people who are going to receive it. So from a strategy point of view, you need to think about all those areas of people.
Definitely. Yes, and it is a bit of a learning curve. There's great resources. It's still a baby because it's open source, so it moves a little slower on features and functionality. But Mark, if somebody wanted to get into AMP and start exploring potentially adding it to their program, what would be the kind of top 2 or 3 things they need to think about?
So, I mean, the first thing I suppose is, can you send AMP emails? So not every ESP currently supports it. I work at Salesforce and we are launching it very, very, very soon. So keep your eyes open if you're a Salesforce user, but not every ESP sends it. Quite a lot do, and more are adding it all the time. So that's the first step. Can you actually send the emails? I guess the next step is, can you build the emails? It's a specialist skill. So not, there's not as many tools available, like drag and drop tools. There are some, but not as many as there are for building an HTML email. And if you've got email developers, if you've got good email developers, so sort of like great, very codey people, then I'm sure they'll be quite excited to try it out. I was when I first heard about it. But people who are maybe more on the marketing side, who do a bit of HTML, might not be as excited by it and may struggle, but you might be able to pull in people from your web development team to help build it. So those are sort of the main things. And then to get started with building, there's the AMP project website is great. There's loads of documentation around it. There's a couple of playgrounds that you can use. So you can go to amp.gmail.dev, I believe it is the AMP Gmail playground. And if you're signed into your Gmail account, you can put some code in there, click send, and it will send it through to your Gmail account. So you can send yourself tests through that as well. And the validator, which is built into that, will give you some help with that. So that will tell you where you've gone wrong with your code and anything that's not valid. So you can look through and help debug your code with that. So it's a lot more tools that we don't have in HTML email that we do in AMP. So it does open up, open it up quite a bit, I think, there.
Awesome. Well, we have a couple questions, so I'm going to skip through a couple areas, and I want to get to these questions. So Min asks, how can you move away from a letter type email, an email that mimics a printed letter? Elliot, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things you could do or try, I guess. One might be, and I get it, right? And quite often you get content supplied to you from other people, whether they're copywriters or other stakeholders or whatever. One thing might be, think about how you would tweet this. Like if you've got someone sending you a whole chunk of text and you want to get those points across, how would you put it on Twitter in a series of tweets, for example? And then maybe have a go at writing that out, and then think, actually, so that could be 3 or 4 nice visual sections in my email. And we can use different background colors or different images or whatever to start breaking up that layout a bit. But in general, maybe look at what your points are and what the when I write either an email or blog post or whatever, I tend to write bullet points first and think about what the key points I'm trying to get across, and then you start to come to a structure from there. So it could be that instead of writing out more words, you think about, actually, let's keep the amount of words quite short and think about how we can use design to give it some more structure instead.
I have a rule of thumb for this, which is you can design an email to be read, or you can design an email to be clicked. It's very hard to do both at the same time.
Yes, that's very true.
And one is trackable and one really isn't, right? You can see like how long somebody had the email open. That doesn't really mean they read everything. I see that happen sometimes when it's tough to get content on a website where there's a lot of hurdles for doing a simple landing page or something like that. So they tend to jam things in the email. So some of that is kind of solving the problem on the web because email has a hard time answering it. Hope that answered your question, Min. And then Ella asks, would you recommend these layouts that you're showing for emails that are sharing B2B content in companies that sell a service, not a product? To me, yes.
Yeah.
And the one thing you see in the inbox is that the order of things people are looking through is all over the place. You might go from DoorDash to Workday to a a timesheet notification to Target. You know what I mean? People are bouncing around so much. So when you see patterns and techniques like this starting to take off, it's because they work. So you're better served if you're really about performance to explore definitely especially the opportunity in B2B a lot of times is a lot of these B2B emails look the same. And if you put your hand over the logo, you probably don't even know which company it is. So it's a good way to stick out against your competition for sure. What do you guys think about that?
I think B2B has this way of, it has to be business, it has to be corporate, it has to be bland, it has to be grey. But it doesn't. It can be exciting. The person reading the email is still a person. It's not, they still have the same emotions and responses to good design and like good content that they would if they were reading a B2C email. It's so the recipient is the same. They have maybe a different head on when they're looking at their work emails compared to their personal emails, but still a lot of these things do work and do translate through.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are sometimes specific layouts that you might do for things. So like webinars, for example, are probably more of a B2B concept, and you might have some layout considerations for an email about webinars. Who's on the panel, how do you sign up, whatever. So there are different use cases for different changes in the layout. But yeah, as Mark said, people are people at the end of the day. Like, what you're trying to do is communicate a message to a person who most likely is busy, whether they're at work or at home, or if it's all the same right now. That it's all about making sure that it's easy and makes sense for people to understand it. And yeah, to Alex's point, the reason we see lots of stuff is because it works, right? So I'd definitely take this, try it. One of the great things about email is testing, so you can see if something works or not and see what the results are. And because we send so much of it, you can learn and try it next time or not, and and build and build and build. But yeah.
No, that's a good point. Kind of to wrap up here, hopefully this is a valuable conversation for folks. I think those type of questions are such huge opportunities, I think, when you start to think about things like that last question. So much you can do, but for you both, from everything we've talked about today, if you're on the other side of the marketer side and you're looking with what should I prioritize that has the most potential for getting lift in my program? It's a big question, but what would you say?
I would say the main thing is get the basics first. If you've got a good design system, a good build system, that gives you time. It gives you time to do more. If you've got good facilities for testing, then that gives you time for doing more. So once all those are in place, then you can do a lot more. I should say interactive because that's what I do. But you need it can be very time consuming. It's sort of, if you think about your ROI, it's about the investment part of it as well as the return. Interactive can give you a very, very, very good return. But if you don't have the right setup, the investment can be very, very, very high. So once that's all built up and it's built in and you have that, then you can have time to experiment more and push things, and you can test them as well to have that, get it working.
Yeah.
All right, Elliot, I'll be like a news person. 30 seconds. We're at time.
So, for me, all the stuff we've looked at today is about making the email easier to understand, the message easier to understand, right? So that should be your yardstick. That's what you should measure everything against, whether it's interactive, choosing different images, different color, whatever. Does it make it easier for people to understand the message? That's my 30 seconds.
Good job. Thanks, guys. Enjoyed the conversation today.
Cheers. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, Mark, and Elliot, for a great conversation on creative trends and email marketing. Next, we're going to be going into our last networking break. So if you want a chance to win that $250 Amazon raffle ticket, now is the last chance to do so. You can go over to networking on the left-hand side of your page, and then we'll be back here at 2:35 for our last panel on